Hello, everybody. Welcome to the NKU Theater Guest Artist Series. Here we are in our 5th week. We have a fantastic guest with us today. I'm Ken Jones, if you don't know that. Eyes up, you can see the square head. And today we have with us Will Brandstetter, who is a professional tour manager, professional actor, and what we're going to find out in a minute that he started out as a dancer. So welcome everybody today, and welcome, Will.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. Now you're from Cincinnati.
Yep, born and raised. Grew up here, just right across the river, Mount Washington.
Okay.
So probably closer to NKU campus than like downtown, but yeah, born and raised in Cincinnati. Went through Cincinnati public schools, graduated from Clark Montessori.
There it is.
And started in the arts because of my sister.
Okay.
She was a dancer. Yeah, Mike from a chorus line, I can do that. It's 100% the story. So she grew up, my parents put her in dance classes right away. I, promptly turned 3 and marched up to my mom and said, well, why am I not dancing as well? And she couldn't argue. And so started there at a neighborhood studio, and, fell in love with that and was recommended to audition for Footlighter's community theater production of Oliver. And so got cast in that, and that's when I met the lovely and talented Deanne Brill.
Deanne Brill on the faculty at NKU.
Or as a small group of friends and I like to refer to her as Deanne Brilliant,
Yes.
But very special connection with Deanne. She was actually my confirmation sponsor and my senior project mentor in high school. So long and deep bond, but she brought me over to CCM Prep, and I started classes there, and then also started training at Cincinnati Ballet. So did that growing up, was in Nutcracker, was in CCM Prep shows, continued to do community theater productions around town, a lot of which was because my high school didn't have a theater department. So there wasn't, that expectation of, you have your fall play and your spring musical and you're doing these 2 shows and you fit in other things. It was always kind of, well, what are the community theaters doing and how do I program a season that way?
At that point, were you thinking about going strictly into like ballet, or were you thinking musical theater, Broadway?
Yeah, so initially, when I started at the neighborhood studio, it was ballet, tap, and jazz, all the way up. And then once I started at CCM and started vocal training and acting as well, then it was ride or die music theater.
Right.
Like my sweet parents, every year would get me for my birthday the Broadway series tickets for the next year. So it was always that, like that was the commitment, that was the goal. Wanted to go to school for music theater, and so did the college audition process and ended up heading to Baldwin-Wallace up in Berea, and had an incredible first week of school, because in addition to getting my feet underneath me in terms of being a functioning adult and all of that, my first year fall semester was the main stage was the Falsettos Trilogy. So all 3 parts of William Finn's incredible and underproduced piece, which was pretty cool for a collegiate experience.
And that's in your first weeks of college?
We had auditions for that the first week of school.
Wow.
So dove right in and put up a great audition and did not get a call back. And which, the competition level is so high and there were so few roles that it was the odds were stacked against me, but ended up being in my favor because they had an ASM dropout. And I had some stage management credits from being here in town and working with Isaac Turner.
Right, an alum of NKU.
Yes, at the Showboat Majestic, and ASM'd a project, stage managed a couple shows, and so I had those credits on my resume. So when I got to school and did my audition, they were looking at my resume again and saw all of that and promptly emailed me after this ASM dropped out and said, would you please fill in and do this?
Great.
And so I was in the room every day as they worked on In Trousers, March, and Falsetto Land. So to sit and watch the process 6 days a week was the most eye-opening experience to me at 17, like marching up to college, like I'm a big man and like know what's going on, and then don't get cast, but then get offered this experience, and it changed the game for me.
So I would say, you know, just from what your story is that you, especially where your career is now, where you started, that when you were at college, you would be very much supportive of, if you're a musical theater person, you should also take stage management classes or costume classes. If you're a dancer, you
100%.
should take acting classes. So mix it up. Don't just do what you do.
Well, interdisciplinary work allows you to see things from different perspectives, right? You know, the best actors are ones who have a mind about directing and, you know, don't need to be reminded to show up to a tech rehearsal in the appropriate clothes. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many ways that you can put yourself ahead. And I think a lot of that comes from learning about other departments and other ways that those same people who are working on the same end goal are doing something completely different. And once you have a respect for it, it makes you that much better of an actor, you know? So I did that, and incredible process. And they were missing a stage manager for the spring production of Figaro, main stage opera. So they had me do that. So at that point, I didn't have performance credits at school. I was really only doing stage management, but then booked summer work doing Secret Garden at Cain Park, and then West Side Story at Porthouse Theatre, which is Kent State's summer summer theater out at Blossom in the Akron, Cleveland area. And did Secret Garden, and then was in rehearsal for West Side Story and ended up tearing cartilage in my knee.
Oh my gosh. And this was at summer. This is during the summer.
Right. So this was the summer between freshman and sophomore year.
Okay.
And if anyone has dealt with that in any way, cartilage is nasty because there's not a repair process. It is a clean and move on kind of scenario. So promptly called Vicki Bussard, the head of the program, and was like, okay, what am I gonna do? And she said, oh, stage management, directing, you'll assist me on Company, which was a musical that fall. She was going to direct in New York that fall as well, the Richard Rodgers Award winner for that year for Best New Musical. It's called Dust and Dreams, and that was a production at the York. So she brought me up there to assistant direct that. And so it was this incredibly fast and like hardcore transition from performing to being on the other side of the table. And
you're still healing.
And yeah. It was a pretty speedy surgery and recovery. But yes, I mean, like I never took dance class again in the same way. It was always kind of like a do what you can, make it work, and still got to do a lot of choreography in college, which was cool to still satiate that after, you know, having grown up dancing for 16 years and then all of a sudden not being able to do it. So
can I ask you a question about that? Of course. A lot of our students, you know, obviously with the pandemic, their plans have been changed, and they found themselves in shows that were canceled, then in another show that was canceled, or they're working backstage, or they're designing shows. How did you, when you had this was a great loss. I mean, you trained pretty much your whole young life
for sure
to be a dancer, and then they tell you can't.
Yeah.
Did you, how did you, I know they offered you other things, but how did you deal with that?
I think part of it is a realization that there is a fragility about it. You know, we as performers, very similar to athletes, you know, use our bodies in, that is the vehicle, right? That is the performance mechanism. And so there is always this risk that you run of something can happen and that can be taken away from you in a situation completely beyond your control. And I think allowing yourself the time to grieve the loss.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And honestly, this might even be more applicable in this scenario. You know, at the beginning of pandemic, I lost 3 contracts in 7 days, right? So like it was very kind of a similar feeling in a different but similar scenario. And it is that recognition of there is something else beyond this moment that's happening, right? Mm-hmm. I got to spend the last 6-7 months at home with my family, and that has been a gift of presence here that wouldn't have happened had you know. So trying to take a step back, bigger picture, and look, yes, this situation's terrible. I had, you know, this lined up. You know, I had friends that were set to make Broadway debuts weeks after, you know, the Broadway shutdown and everything. And the grace with which people have existed has been, you know, pretty incredible. Yeah. You know, at least a public front, which is which is important. But that ability to look beyond yourself and see things from a different perspective, I think is helpful in a situation like this, but also when you're out there pounding the pavement and all of that, it's so easy to get so focused on the minutiae of the details, right? I have to be up at this time, I have to be at equity at this time, I have to do this, I have to do this. It's always been so helpful to be able to, you know, remove yourself, look at it, assess it, you know, and I think that kind of perspective was helpful for me. Again, super hard when you're 18 or 21 or 33, or not that it's easy, it gets easier, but I think you get more equipped to deal with the losses, you know, you're used to it.
So you are, now you find yourself as a stage manager in college. Right. It sounds like you have some very supportive faculty.
Incredibly so.
Yeah. So you would say that going to your undergraduate was important for your career?
Undoubtedly. I think there are people who, again, get focused on one specific thing. And I know that there are performance programs that if I had been elsewhere in the country and this exact same thing would have been like, cool, you know, we're so sorry that this happened. Best of luck in your future.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't perform. This is a performance program. We're so sorry. And instead, you know, I credit Vicky with just like grabbing my hand and saying, this sucks, and we're going to do this now. Right. And the doors that opened, you know, I had my equity card this summer after my junior year. Wow. So the pathway was there, you know, to be ready to roll, you know, to be on the road. And so all of that kept going. I graduate, and then my dad is off of remission for brain cancer. And so I come back to Cincinnati. I'm here for 2.5 years. He ultimately passes. But while I was here, a friend of mine was on tour with Mannheim Steamroller, selling merchandise of all things. And she, the tour was routed to Cincinnati for Christmas. They were playing the Aronoff on the day after Thanksgiving. They were here for Thanksgiving. And so I said to her, you know, obviously you're coming to our house for Thanksgiving. We'll have a family dinner. She said, that's cool. You just have to hang out with me and my boss later that evening. I told her, you know, we would spend time together since the holiday. And that woman, Gretchen Farr, dear friend, is the person who's hired me for 90% of my tour work since. So it really, truly was a right place, right time scenario, which was so needed in the midst of everything else that was going on in my personal life. And so they called me a year later to come out and selling merch because the person they hired couldn't wrap their head around it. And so that was my first tour contract in the fall of 2009.
Was with
Mannheim Steamroller.
Selling merchandise.
Selling merch. And then they brought me back the following year, Christmas of 2010, as production assistant.
Wow.
And so that was the first foray into this kind of other side of the management world, from stage management and being, you know, entrenched in the show itself and the physical production This was more about establishing everything else around it. And so production assistant first year, and then second year came back and was a production assistant again, knowing that I was going to be tour managing my first tour after that. So that was kind of the training period for that next tour, which was Behind the Myths with Jamie and Adam from MythBusters, the TV show.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now, we have a lot of management students. We have a lot of actors, musical theater dancers who are also thinking management and other things are floating through their head. Tell us what a tour manager does.
So, a tour manager for concert tours is basically interchangeable with a company manager for theatrical tours. So, two different titles, more so the genre in which they apply to, but same role, same overall position. So we're thinking about all of the logistics of everything beyond the physical production. So that's staffing, that's payroll, that's transportation logistics, that's catering, that's housing, that's ticketing, that's box office settlement, it's petty cash, it's Amex, it's...
Okay, so you're a dancer.
Yeah.
Who went into stage management.
Yeah.
And so who taught you that? I mean, is that what you got from being a production assistant?
Yeah.
Looking over the shoulder?
Exactly.
Tour managers?
And because it's one of those things that it is incredibly difficult to think about training for this because there's not a mock production tour somewhere that you can go fake a settlement or fake a budget or do this kind of thing. So it is about assisting and learning that way. Gretchen, who was my boss as production assistant, she was a tour manager, was my boss again on MythBusters. Wow. She was the GM as I was the tour manager. General manager as I was the tour manager. And so basically, like, another way of kind of looking at it is that the tour manager, the company manager, is the producer's representative on the road. Right. So I'm acting as the representative of the management of the company who's sending the tour.
Which is an incredible amount of responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, every city is different.
Absolutely.
Every day is different.
100%.
All your actors, all your crew, the people you're now dealing with when you go into a theater.
Exactly.
Whether it's the right theater or things are wrong with it, you have to manage that on a daily basis.
Correct.
So it's is that a stressful job?
Ever so slightly. But it's one of those things where, you know, in having done it for 10 years now, one of the things you learn is the function of advance work is in your control, right? So like the amount of work that I do before we get to rehearsals or tech for a tour is in a direct relationship with how much easier things are when you get out there. Okay. And so then it becomes about responding to the things that are coming up, which will always come up, right? There's always going to be an issue. The labor call is wrong. The bus doors won't open. You know, there's always going to be something that comes up. So the more work that you do on the front end before you even get there, the easier it is to respond to the things that come up on the day-to-day. And I really do credit, you know, all of the training, right? Because being a director and stage manager puts me in a different perspective, and as opposed to just coming from a management background, like the artistry and that appreciation is still there. Like I have a different sympathy for, you know, I company managed the second national tour of FELA. And so I felt a really incredible connection with the dancers because I knew what they were doing. You know, they were putting themselves through incredible athletic work, 8 shows a week. And I respected them in a different way than I think other people did, because there is that understanding and there is that background and knowledge of, I know what their bodies are going through.
Right.
So I know that when they're complaining to me about there's no physical therapy on the tour, I get it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I understand and I empathize and I will fight for that and do this and that and the other. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you do MythBusters.
Yep.
And then what does that lead to?
So at that point, I was still primarily working for Magic Space Entertainment, which is a company that does Mannheim and does MythBusters. And so with not really expanding my touring work beyond just one company, I still had a job that I would go back to in Cleveland, where I was based at the time, as a mixologist. I was a bartender for a restaurant.
Okay.
And so I would go back and forth. So I'd have these contracts, and then I'd go back to Cleveland, and I'd, work in between.
How did you get the mixology? Did you have to take classes for that, or is that again something you looked over somebody's shoulder and learned?
Yeah. So when I was in college, my side hustle was always food service.
Okay.
And worked at a bar with an amazing guy, Everest, who was really into cocktails and super focused on that. And so started, working with him as he would make things, kind of watching him, and that sparked an interest. And ended up at a restaurant that I loved in Cleveland, all throughout school. Had worked at a sister restaurant and showed up there and said, I'm ready to roll. And they're like, cool. So I had, free range of everything in the restaurant, including the kitchen and the chefs, in terms of being able to ask questions and gain knowledge and all of that. So a bit of a guiding hand and a lot of, self-teaching. But I would do that in between these tour contracts as they would line up. And then it got to a point where there were some other things coming into play. I was out with MythBusters, Mannheim was coming back, and then that's when I got the call about FELA to go out for the second national. And at that point, it was getting to be clear that, there's work to be had. Mm-hmm. It is within my reach, and this is all going well. So you made the choice to leave and not go back to the restaurant and really make the commitment to doing, being on tour full time, always kind of having, looking for the next project, curating what's next. And so after FELA ended, I worked kind of my last stint at the restaurant, went back out with Mannheim, and then MythBusters picked up. And so that was out. And then I started with Alton Brown from Food Network.
Okay, now here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
This is where you're going to blow their minds.
Yeah.
Because you are completely a Renaissance man. I mean, you have dance, you have acting, you have directing, you have stage management. The tour manager package includes everything from budgeting to calling ahead for reservations to medical assistance of people. So you have all this, but then you talk about the mixology.
Yeah.
So that is going to tell them now, because a lot of their dreams are to go to Broadway.
Of course.
And your path to being a Broadway actor is amazing, because that's a dream. That's a dream for everybody to walk on Broadway stage and be a Broadway actor.
Yeah.
So everything you just talked about came together to get you to be on Broadway.
Exactly. So I was filling in for my boss on Alton's tour. It was already in existence. It had been built. And so I was out for a couple weeks. And had a really strong connection with Mr. Brown, and they were in the process of getting ready to build a new tour called Eat Your Science. And so I was contracted to tour manage that, and got the show started. We teched in Charleston. It was like 3 or 4 days into the show being out, and he walked into my office one afternoon and said, I've made a mistake. And I said, okay, how can I fix this for you? And he said, no, I have a whole section in my show about cocktails, and I have you, who has this incredible background and base of knowledge about it, and I'm having someone who doesn't know what they're doing on stage acting as a bartender. Why are you not doing this? And so that started my nightly on-stage appearance in the tour. So he had a bit about classic cocktails and the premise that all classic cocktails are based on 3 ingredients.
Okay.
And so what he did was he fashioned a Delta food service cart into a rolling bar, okay. And would have me come out and make him a gin martini and myself a Manhattan, both of which have 3 ingredients, to kind of illustrate this point. And then we would invite an audience participant to come up on stage and ask them if they would like a drink, and promptly roll out what looked like Price is Right wheels that had cocktails ingredients on them. And so the person would have to spin the wheel,
okay.
and whatever they spun, we would make. So I was on stage throughout the show. And after we had our first tour that spring, I think this was spring of 2016, we had our first tour of Eat Your Science, and found out that the show had been booked for a week run on Broadway. So we were booked at the Barrymore, and that was Thanksgiving of 2016. And so we did a couple shows right before then, had a day of tech in the theater, and then had our run. So yeah, got to be on stage, which was pretty incredible. And fun fact, the dressing room that I had was John Benjamin Hickey's for 6 Degrees of Separation, which was in the Barrymore right before or after us. So fun little celebrity moment. But yeah, so that's how that crazy, convoluted, but absolutely perfect pathway happened.
And I think from what we're hearing with Will talking, is that each leg of your journey, which now has been many years, and you're working hard at each one, that you worked hard at each leg of it. I mean, whether you were a stage manager, an actor, a dancer, a tour manager, or then the bartender in a Broadway show. Right. It was all about hard work, showing up on time, being dependable, because he would never have asked you to be on Broadway doing it if he hadn't liked you, if you hadn't been a great tour manager, right. And if he hadn't seen you mix those drinks.
And it's his name first, right? It's Alton Brown, Eat Your Science. It's not Alton Brown and Will Brandstetter. It's his show.
Right.
So the trust of, being able to be in the show and have that relationship, that dynamic with him on stage for people that are paying a lot of money to see the show. Right. It is an incredible synthesis of like all the parts and pieces, It was crazy. I grew up, like I said, I wanted to be a Broadway dancer. That was always the goal. And as soon as I injured myself in college, I just assumed that was over, in terms of at least the performance part. I thought, there's always a chance that there may be a management contract available, or I could get there in another way.
Sure.
But had really put to rest the idea of that being a reality. And so the fact that it happened is still kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It is awesome. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So what were you working on when all this happened? What show were you on or going to?
So I went back this past Christmas and was out with Mannheim Steamroller again, which was the 10th anniversary of my first contract.
So you made it through Christmas?
Made it through Christmas, and was prepping The Illusionists.
Okay.
I was going out for the last few months, or the last few weeks of that, and so that's what shut down initially.
Okay.
And so I was in the process of advancing that, and that's an interesting one because the tour was already out. So I was going to relieve someone for the last 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So it was this weird kind of transition of you know, someone has the role and then I'm coming in. So we were working together on that transition of, I've advanced these cities, this is what needs to be done here, you know, getting contracts together, all of that. So the logistics and details for that were all in place. And so as, you know, like we got to that second week of March before things started to happen, it was more of a, okay, we need to slow down here. There's a different force at play here. So I was working on that, and that was the only thing that I was actively working on in terms of, you know, we have a route here, we know that this is coming. So, so then it began a process of occupying myself, you know, which is, it's hard in terms of, you know, being a gig worker, being an independent contractor, because while I've worked for a bunch of different production companies, I'm not an employee of the company. Right. I'm always an employee of the tour. So I'm self-employed for all intents and purposes.
Where was your home base? I forgot to ask you that during your touring.
So initially it was Cleveland.
Okay.
And so I had a home base there from 2011 until I directed Bring It On, collaboration between Baldwin-Wallace and the Beck Center, and that was January of 17. So I moved out of my place there and was a nomad. Okay. For 2.5, almost 3 years. So I had everything in storage, and between contracts would float, see people, hang out. And so it was kind of this, you know, fitting it all together of where do you go in between things. But the work was so consistent that it didn't make sense to continue to pay rent somewhere where I was never going to be.
So you did everything we've just heard about.
Yeah.
Without ever going to New York City.
Correct. I've never lived in New York.
Right.
I've done, you know, I've been there for prep for FELA and Rock of Ages and when those things get out. But never have lived there. Have never had residence anywhere other than Ohio.
And that's probably blowing their mind. That all roads don't lead out of New York City. You can be in many, many places and develop a career that is still what we would consider a New York City Broadway career. I mean, you did Broadway tours.
Yeah, absolutely. And the benefit of that was I never had to audition. Right. Like that's what forces people to be in that location. You know, some of the people that I tour with, a lot of people are based out of Nashville, Vegas, you know, just because there's a lot of other kind of industrial work in between. But, you know, the number of people that I know that are doing what I do that are in New York City, I mean, most of them are Broadway company managers. Sure. You know, there are very few people that I think are people who are on tour frequently that are using that as a home base just because of the costs associated with it. Yeah. I figured out a way to have a very minimal cost of living and being able to kind of hop from contract to contract.
Now, you've been in Cincinnati with your family.
Yeah.
Where to next? Are you going to stay in the east? Are you moving to the north? Are you going to the west?
I am moving to Portland on Wednesday.
So the Pacific Northwest.
Pacific Northwest, yeah. So
on Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
Holy cow!
Moving trucks coming Tuesday. Yeah. But it was a move that I wanted to make because I needed to regain some semblance of control. You know, I think that's what a lot of people are faced with right now, and I'm not special in that, is that, you know, so many things have happened over the last 6-7 months that are forces beyond us. And so for me, this feels like an opportunity to kind of take the time and make the most of it if the work that I really want to do and was doing is not available to me at this point. Make a change focus. So I'm going out west to hopefully hike every day. Like that's honestly the goal.
Are you going for the climate and in the area, or are you going for
I mean the natural beauty.
The politics? Let's say it.
The hotbed of anarchy. No, I really want to be able to take a shift and focus away, because for the last 10 years of my life, the focus has been on career, right? And
Right.
balancing family needs within that, and kind of having these awesome breaks of time. You know, the touring lifestyle affords you these moments in between where you're just off for weeks at a time and can do whatever you want. So I've had these moments of personal joy and being able to focus kind of on different things beyond the career. But those moments have been pretty few because of the very grateful for consistency of work. And so now that that is not in play, it kind of gives me the opportunity to think about, okay, now you have another option.
Sure.
Now you have time that you're not focused on this work, go do something else, you know, so.
How, you know, again, you know, when they're 18 to 22.
Yeah. And
everything seems like it's A to B to C to D to E to F. You know, if I go here, then I go there. But that's not true. I mean, your alphabet has been shaken up, and we pull a Q out, and we pull a D out, and an M out.
100%.
So you're going all over the place. How do you decide to pick Portland? How, you know, it's a beautiful, we know it's beautiful.
Absolutely.
We know the climate's amazing.
Yeah.
You're near the Pacific.
Yeah. So a lot of it for me was a balance of, you know, when it is available, the art scene is incredibly strong, great theater, beautiful touring spaces. Their food scene's on point, which is crucial for me. And the focus of nature and being outside as a part of everyday life and culture there, those are the things that have kind of pointed me there. But all of that's because I've spent time there because of working there.
So you've toured through Portland?
Oh yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And toured the whole coast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I've worked in all 48 contiguous U.S. states.
Amazing.
So
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Australia, New Zealand, the United Arab Emirates. Yeah.
Wow.
All over Canada.
So you know where you want to be.
Exactly.
Touring's
yeah,
allowed
the
you to pick a
opportunity
city.
to see what the country has to offer in terms of all the different you know, locations and places. And you know, I'm really looking forward to kind of having an inward moment. You know, I think there's a lot of what's happening right now. There's so much around us that is, you know, loud and noisy and all of that.
Sure.
And so for me, it's kind of, I'm taking this as a time to kind of introspect and figure out, you know, when will we be back to a tour going out that looks like something we're familiar with? And I want to ride that out somewhere where I can be outside every day and enjoy it.
That's great. When you were on tour, and you would go through Portland, because of the amount of work it sounds like you had to do, did you ever, when a show went into a theater, did you have time to break out and be able to go?
Yeah, I would always try and get out for at least, you know, 15 minutes to walk around and be present in the place beyond just sitting in the back of the theater. You know, a lot easier on week-long sit-downs versus one-nighters. And then also choosing to spend time there on layoffs. So, you know, like being able to say, okay, we have a week in between a play in Seattle and San Diego. I don't really want to fly back to the East Coast. I'll just stay on the West Coast and explore a little bit. And so more and more often that was becoming Portland and really wanting to spend time there. So.
Will, do you think, this is a weird question, but do you think that's you, or do you think that's other tour managers you've worked with or people on a tour? Do you think that you had that in you, that you wanted to get out and see the world? I know that having been on tours before myself, sometimes you lock yourself in and you just see what you're doing, and a lot of people don't take advantage of what you said.
And it's hard, right? Because the lifestyle is constantly moving. There's so little time built in to be able to take those moments. But what I found was, you know, there are very few things that needed, very few times where I couldn't walk away and feel okay about it. You know, there's very few times when something is at a stake high enough to warrant not being able to do that. And I think part of that is, again, going back to that idea of advance work. Like, if you've laid it all out, if you've set up everything you need to, the variables are lower. The chances of things happening are lower. And so I think that allows you that wiggle room in terms of having the time. But also I think it's about creating it, because if you don't, you know, that job is on call 24/7 from the moment you sign the contract until the moment everyone's home. You know, so the commitment to the duration is so intense that I think people get burnt out really easily if there aren't those moments of, you know, I'm going to take 15 minutes,
Sure.
I'm going to go walk, I'm going to get coffee, I'll be back. Put a sign on the door, here's my number, call me if you need me.
Right.
But
Sure.
just being able to see that there's a world existing around you. You know, we always used to joke that the best days on tour is when you had time to go to Target. Right? Like, there's a world, there are things happening around you. There are people that are in existence beyond just this nuclear family. It becomes a family, but as family happens, there's all kinds of things that are constant. So, yeah.
What do you think, what, in your professional opinion, and certainly you probably have your finger on the pulse of tours that are trying to decide when they're starting back up and what could happen. And we saw that, like, cruise industry, they were going to go in August and they delayed to October. Now they've delayed again, and Broadway's delaying.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on, do you think it's going to be dependent upon a vaccine to get back into your world, or do you think that matters, or what?
I think it's really hard because financially, to make, you know, a tour make sense, you know, we're looking at a higher capacity needed to be sold than what all of the experts are saying is safe at this point in terms of an enclosed space. You know, typically we're looking at, you know, around 70% is what our budgets are based on in terms of bottom line, like, this is what we need to do to make money. And so to not be able to sell past that amount, I think it requires a huge, you know, reassessment of how it is we're looking at this. You know, you think about the variables in terms of numbers of people, and I think there are ways to do that with fewer people on stage, right? You reduce down.
Sure.
We're looking at solo shows and two-handers and all of that, but we're also talking about some of the smallest and most beautifully intimate spaces that we have, right? And so to think about how many people and at what ticket cost could you even produce a solo show, and will, you know, at what level will people be willing to buy that ticket?
So even if we figure out how to do from the curtain line backwards with actors, the problem really now is how many can sit in the audience, which is what happened to our season. We came up with great ideas how to do the season we had with actors. But we still couldn't put more than, in this 300-seat theater, 20, 30 people. Which we couldn't make it financially.
And if you think about, you know, that's just the logistics of doing a show in one place. You then add in traveling people from city to city, hotels, busing, flights, catering. I mean, it's so many variables. Exactly. You know, I think if there were something that were, you know, makes sense in this moment to come back to, you know, we're walking away from it because of weather, right? Like, there's this idea that, okay, well, maybe you can socially distance an outdoor event, you know, that would make sense for a stadium or an arena, you know, we're talking top tier, big acts. But again, if we're looking at it socially distanced, I think there's just such an issue with cost structure because of all of the elements that are required. Like, you really then have to go back and say, okay, where can we save money? Well, if we don't carry our lighting and sound equipment, if we source that all locally, that's saving money. So that helps us out. But that means that we would really only be able to do 2 or 3 shows in one city before we have to tear that all down and go do that somewhere else. There's just so many variables.
And maybe our students watching, when you're on a tour, how many people are with you?
So
cast, crew?
Yeah, it depends. You know, I've done one-man shows where it's me as all tech and one performer. And when I was out on FELA, I think it was 48 in the company. So kind of just depends. And that is still on the smaller side for a full-scale tour. You know, I mean, there are tours that have hundreds of people on them. But in terms of like the sweet spot for where I was at with the majority of my work with Alton, with MythBusters, those were typically around 12 to 16 people. So, but that's in terms of who we're carrying.
Sure.
Then in each city, you know, we're picking up a local crew of 20 to 28 people for a smaller tour, up to 50, 55 people for a bigger tour.
And you would be the liaison with those crews?
Our production managers fill that role.
Right.
So the production manager is kind of the technical lead
Right.
for the tour. And so they're the person that would advance labor.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is a lot of contact, and it's a lot of hotel rooms in every city.
100%.
A lot of restaurants and food and
Exactly.
things that we don't even think about. We just think about performing in an audience, but we forget about concessions and selling stuff to make money for the tour.
Yep.
Wow. Holy cow.
I know.
Well, you are, you're incredibly positive. You're incredibly talented. It's great to hear your story.
Yeah.
And I think your epilogue to our meeting today is that you're going to Portland.
Yeah.
And that's inspiring. That you are making a change for positivity in your life, which I think all of us kind of get into a rut and we're like, what can we do?
For sure.
But we can make a change.
Yeah.
I guess in our final seconds here, is there anything, any advice you would give to actors, dancers, techs, stage management, anybody who's studying theater right now for us, about how to handle themselves to get to where you are?
Yeah. I think the one thing that I have found over the years that all people that I know within this industry that have a measured level of success, however they value that, right? Because I know people who have graduated and worked from regional theater contract to contract who have way more in the bank than my friends who've lived in New York waiting out the Broadway gig, right? There's a lot of different layers of success and ways to define it. But I think what runs through all of those people that have found that success is that there is something in their life that provides them joy beyond this. I think it's really easy as performers especially, but anyone who's associated with this craft, to get so focused on the next job, the next audition, the next, that it is easy to lose sight of the full process and the full journey and the overarching trajectory of kind of how a career could look. And so I think the people who have found that success are ones who don't need all of their mentals and emotional stimulus to be satiated by the craft. If you have something else that brings you joy beyond this, there's a desperation about this that leaves you. When it's not the only thing that fulfills you, there is a different, it's just a different energy. And I think all of us who've sat on the side of the table in auditions have seen that from people who've walked in the room. There is kind of this, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, I'm not the right fit. And it is, you know, it's just one audition in the bigger picture. And so I think that energy, we all want that. That's the energy I want to work with. And so the people that have that, to me, have always been people who have, you know, if it is a side hustle, selling hand knitting stuff, if it is, you know, the quest for the, you know, crafting the perfect mojito, if it's gardening, if it's, you know, it can be anything, but it is a passion for something that's beyond the arts, because it is a brutal and incredibly difficult path. Sure. Right? This isn't, none of us are choosing this because it's the easy road. Right. And if you are, I'm so sorry you've made the wrong choice. But to be able to weather it, to be able to ride it out, I think it really does require something beyond this that brings you calm, that puts you in a place that can be the foil to the intensity of the industry, the art form, and all of that.
You know, if I was a publisher, I would give you a book contract right now to write a small book saying just what you said, because it's probably, after all my years of 40-something years in this business, that was probably the best explanation I've ever heard of how to have something else, as you put it, to take away the desperation of feeling the desperation of trying to get the role or the job, but also having something to balance your life. So.
And it's not to say that we shouldn't stay focused in that way, because it does, like, those same people who do have that success have it because they are that focused on it when they are focused on it. Right. They are 110% on it when they are on it. And when they're not in the room, they're somewhere else. They can walk away and say, it was what it was, it's out of my hands. Now we're gonna go back to what I do have control of, which is my commute to my apartment in Harlem, and my dog, my garden, you know, like.
Which inadvertently gives them confidence, which gets you cast or hired. Yes, right. It all roads lead back to that.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Will, thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
You're amazing. Thank you. We wish you so much happiness in Portland.
Thanks.
And we're ready for the tours to get going again.
Oh, you and me both.
And one last question.
Yeah.
Have you ever toured through Cincinnati? Come back to your hometown?
Oh, yeah. So
and what did that feel like?
It's bizarre. I mean, it's such a moment of pride. Like, there's this incredible feeling of, well, and especially, you know, the Aronoff and the guys there. Local 5 is the best union in the country. Absolutely. I will say it over and over again. Local 5 is the bomb. But it is such an incredible moment of pride to walk in all of these people from tour and say, this is the house I grew up in. Yeah. You know, I've performed in the Jarson Kaplan all the time. And so it's like, okay, guys, welcome to my house.
That's nice.
It's a blast.
That's nice.
And I always get Skyline, and I always get graders. And what else?
And I know Deanne Brill is always in the audience.
Yes, always.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us today. And join us next week with Aaron Lavine, who is an alum of NKU from many years ago, who was on in Spider-Man on Broadway. And most recently, he was Jesus in the national tour of Jesus Christ Superstar. So join us next week. Thank you again, Will. And bye, everybody.